Okay, so for my final project, I wanted to make a probabilistic drum machine. Drum machines are very often used during the songwriting process and also for performance. And typically, they are just static loops that repeat exactly the same every time. And sometimes that is what you want, but a lot of times that's not really ideal. For a lot of people who are used to playing with live drummers, a drum machine kind of pales in comparison. And one of the reasons for that is that live drummers typically don't play the exact same thing over and over. So my idea was to make a probability-based drum machine which will maintain some of that spontaneity and offer opportunities for surprise, which can be very useful during the creative process. Okay, so let's take a look at the patch. All right, so there's a lot going on here, but I'll start from the beginning. So right here is the MIDI input coming from my controller. I use this strip note object to ignore the note off messages. And these select objects are basically just routing data based on which key you press. So each of these numbers corresponds to a different button on the controller. So if you press one of these, then it will get routed to one of these probability selector objects. So let's take a look at these. We can ignore this part for now. I'll explain that later. The main part here is the counter. So basically every time you press the button, it will advance this counter by 1 and loop back on itself. And you can see the outputs are connected to messages. So if you look at the last number in each of these messages, that's the actual probability that is being set. So it goes from 0 up to 100, and then it goes down to 90, 75, 50, 25, and 10, and then back to 0. So based on the button you press, it will send a message to grid input. This S stands for send. So I'll close this, and this is the receive for grid input. So those messages get sent here. You saw that there were 3 numbers. So the last number was the probability, and the first 2 numbers are the basically like the cell address in this table. So like this first cell would be 0, 0. All right, so when you press the buttons on the controller, you'll see them reflected here in the table. So I'll go ahead and press some. You can see that when you press it for the first time, it goes to 100, meaning there's a 100% chance of that event happening. And as you hit the button multiple times, it will cycle through these values. So it goes from 100 down to 90, and it keeps going down until it hits 0 again, and then it will go back up to 100. You can see that the probabilities are reflected in the LED colors. They get more red as it becomes less likely. I use these buttons on the side to correspond to these probabilities as well. So if you want to input a probability of 10, you can hold down this button and press any of these. So 0 lets you undo a button if you didn't mean to press it. And in the case where you just want to clear everything off, you can use this top button here. Basically, whatever buttons you press here, you will see reflected here in the table. Each of those probabilities gets sent to one of these objects. This object just takes the probabilities of each event at each step in the sequence and calculates a weighted probability that is relative to the other events. Okay, so after it calculates the weighted probabilities, it sends those down to these objects. We can take a look at this. Yeah, so again, this object is basically just doing the actual probability calculation. So it gets the number of the probability and then uses that using these split objects and the random 100 objects to actually route a bang through these probabilities. And the output of those objects are these sends here. And so what you end up after all of that is basically just bangs coming out of sends. And those sends get sent over here. And that all that does is trigger a MIDI message to the MIDI out. Okay, so next I'll just do a short demo so you can see what it looks like in action. I'll go ahead and press play. You can see the sequence advancing here. First thing I'll do is just put in some kicks. So these have 100% probabilities. You can see that on the Ableton side as well. So I'll go ahead and add some snares. So at this point, I'll identify what are the main beats that I really need. So I'm going to keep this first kick and I'm going to keep the snares, but the rest I think can be lower probability. So those are at 75 now. So you can see that sometimes they're getting missed. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in some even lower probability events. So I'll fill in these gaps. Okay, so after I recorded the drum tracks, I wanted to add some musical elements, and you could use the same device, but I wanted a little more variety in the amount of sounds. So I just went through the samples in Ableton. I pulled a bunch of random ones and put them into a drum rack. And then I put a randomized arpeggiator in front of that. And I put together a short clip here that includes the drum tracks I recorded earlier.